Cool. So my name is Lucas Brown, and today we're going to be talking about the future of tech in Alaska. It does relate to the outdoors, so we will get there. So why listen to me? I went to Babson College in Boston, Mass, ranked really high for entrepreneurship. Twin brother that's a software engineer, really experienced. Started our first business in college and generated our first $1 million in revenue out in our college dorm room. Founded our current software company 10 years ago, so we've gone through all phases of growth for a company. 70 million annual revenue, 250 employees around the world. And we want to help build tech companies here in Alaska, and that's where Geeks in the Woods comes from. So why is the future of tech in Alaska, and how does this have to do with outdoor recreation? Well, over the last 10 years, we've seen the community in Seattle change a lot. Skyrocketing cost of living, a decline in a sense of community, and also a decrease in our ability in Seattle to be connected to nature. And so our employees believe that we've created a great workplace culture in Seattle and some of our other offices, but these changes in Seattle have made it difficult for us to uphold this level of a sense of community and sense of connection to nature. And so with that in mind, there's some other trends that are happening up here in Alaska is that people are moving out of the state of Alaska. There is some cases where just because the people that live here, Alaska's population is not necessarily declining, but people are still moving out. And in addition, where are they moving to? Well, primarily up here in the top left, that's Washington, and then there's Oregon and Idaho. People are moving to the Pacific Northwest, and particularly back in Washington, where I just came from. And so my brother and I, we moved to Alaska 2 years ago in an effort to explore new ways of working and with a higher quality of life with an increased sense of community. And that's where Geeks in the Woods comes from, is our exploration of this. This is a cool video. Let's see if it plays.
I had been seeing them for months. These super intriguing photos from Tune's founders, Lucas and Lee. In Alaska? Turns out, Geeks in the Woods isn't just the annual off-site retreat for engineers anymore. It's a movement. I met up with Lee in Anchorage, and soon we were on a plane to Valdez, Alaska. The chance to see firsthand what's going on up there. Immediately it became clear that this is something very traditional for Alaska. This is pioneering. This is tech homesteading. For now, Lee calls it an experiment. He's seeing if people can live and work outside of crowded city centers, closer to nature.
The experiment is to help define what is work-life integration.
Communication technology keeps advancing, but the way we work and live isn't. The idea is to entice people at Tune to come up to Valdez and give it a try. An option to see a new place, bond with coworkers, feel inspired and refreshed. And Lee is a great host. The amount of tools, toys, comforts, and luxuries brought to Valdez is amazing.
Right here is the most important part about camp is we have power. Being software engineers, professionals, we have to stay connected, and we're connected here in Valdez.
Back in Seattle, I met up with a couple Tune engineers to hear about their recent experience in Alaska. They had a chance to visit as well.
It's like, have you ever been somewhere that is so far outside of what you had previously comprehended or imagined that it kind of shocks you?
And so it's like inside programming, like with the wind flapping and like the tents like, and like you can get a lot of things done just like in that small environment. And then like you go out and you open the door and it's just like mountains. This is all you can see, right?
Things are still in the early stages with Geeks in the Woods Valdez. Working and living in tents in the Alaska winter, you might think, surely that's way too cold to live, but no, not really. I think the bunk tent was warmer than my house. I learned that it's extra motivating to get work done and focus when you know there's immense beauty and endless options for exploration literally out the door. There's just something about being able to get some work done, head out the tent, hop in an ATV, and go eat some bacon. Rumor has it that some cabins are in order, and no doubt this place will look a lot different in the summertime, opening up even more space to work and play. I got the sense that this is the start of something big. I mean, when Lucas and Lee put their mind to something, they get it done. That's how Tune exists in the first place.
Yeah, they have a good history of executing on their visions.
It's clear that Lee has been hooked by Alaska. It happens. Alaska is a place where you can make your own path and feel truly alive. And Lee is spreading that notion. The state of Alaska itself has fallen on hard times economically.
State revenues are down more than 80% from 4 years ago.
There's been a big dependence on old technology in the past. I left Valdez wondering, what if tech could save Alaska? The future here is still being written, and I, for one, can't wait to see what happens next.
So our story will be a part of a larger trend of these creative workers being attracted to Alaska that we believe is actually going to be driving the future of diversified economic growth up here. And so these creative workers are actually going to fuel growth in Alaska. So what is this? So these creative workers, they're actually a part of it. There's some researchers out of Florida that did this study, and they classified this group of people called the creative class, and it makes up about 40 million of people in the United States, which is 30% of the U.S. workforce, and it's comprised of two subsets of groups of people. One is the super creative core, and then the creative professionals. And so the super creative core, it's about 12% of U.S. jobs, obviously the smaller group out of the two. Wide range of occupations, including science, engineering, education, computer programming, research, and entrepreneurship. And their primary job is to be creative and innovative. And then the second group, the larger, so instead of 12%, it's 18%. And these are the classic knowledge-based workers who are involved in healthcare, such as our hospital here, business, finance, legal, and education. And they just draw on a complex set of knowledge in order to solve specific problems. And they do this with their higher degrees of education. And so we believe that this creative class is a key driver for economic development in the post-industrial cities in the United States. And this presents an opportunity for us up here in Alaska. And so there's three ways to attract this creative class to actually come here to Alaska and be part of our communities. And there's the three T's. So it's talent, tolerance, and technology. So talent obviously is experienced workforce that's skilled and educated. Tolerance is this idea of a diverse community. And then technology. We need technology infrastructure to enable all of this. And so Alaska has been investing in education of its future workforce. The college, the University of Alaska is doing a great job with that. There's also different school districts are embracing tech to train our future workforce. But this alone will not actually allow our workforce here to catch up with workforces down in the lower 48. And ultimately develop this economy driven by a creative class. And so first, we need to add an accelerator of talent by attracting people outside of Alaska to come and be a part of these cities up here in this post-industrial area. So the first one is talent is interested in moving north for improved quality of life. And so Dr. Collins certainly has tapped into this idea of how do we attract those individuals to come up here. And so I've been in Seattle for 10 years and grew up near Olympia, and first it was everybody's moving to Silicon Valley, and now Seattle was an underdog city, and then everybody from Silicon Valley was moving up to Seattle. Now Seattle's a major tech hub, and why can't we have some cities up here that have this idea of the creative class be a part of Alaska's future? And so, yeah, Seattle is the top pick for Silicon refugees. Hopefully in 5 to 10 years, maybe Alaska and Anchorage or even Valdez can be a top pick. And this just is a newer data set showing that residents in King County, or where Seattle's located in, most of those people are coming from California. And we can replicate those trends up here. But the good news is that Seattleites are worried about quality of life. Brother and I did a survey of tech workers in Seattle that work for Amazon, Expedia, and Facebook. And so the red box there is 30%, and that's for people that want to move south to Oregon and California, but the blue slice right there is 29.5, almost 30% of people that want to move north to Canada and Alaska. So there is, Canada certainly a ways from here, depending on which area of Canada. But there is a big sense that people do want to come north. And in addition to that, technology has been changing the way that we work, and we'll get into more of that in a minute. But if they wanted to work remotely for their current companies and come up here and be a part of various communities like Valdez or Ketchikan or Anchorage, would they come up here and work remotely? And 73% of those tech workers said yes. And so kind of have this quick recipe of how we believe that we can actually start getting some of these creative class to move up here and be part of our economies or communities and economies. So number one, we need AK businesses to hire creative workers remotely. It's going to be a challenge to get them to commit to moving up here, so let's start hiring them now and get them to work for us. The employees of AK businesses convince the workers to move here. Dr. Collins has done that several successful times, it sounds like. Remote workers fall in love with Alaska, they relocate here, and this is the key part, number 5, is where those creative transplants actually train the talent that was developed by Alaska's educational system. We have to bridge that gap in order for this to work. So the great thing about all this is Alaska's in a great position to attract talent for a high quality of life. 6 months ago, so there's been a lot of talk about this, but some communities in Alaska have made some great steps about trying to embrace these trends and attract them. So this is Ketchikan. They launched this campaign called Live Connected, Live in Ketchikan. What's interesting about it is they've qualified a lot of these intangible things and compared Seattle right there, right here with Ketchikan. I think they did a really good job of these things that we haven't been able to just put on the table to understand the benefits. And so obviously the home price is much cheaper. But then the crime as a percentage of the US average, well, it's 15% above average in Seattle. And they just have bears and wolves. That's all the crime that they have. Mega commute, so people in Seattle that commute 90 plus more minutes a day from 2010 to 2015 went up 72%. Could actually fly from Ketchikan to Seattle in that same time. So why are you doing that? And in addition, so a lot of the other parts of quality of life come into this idea of being connected to nature. And so fishing, obviously, hunting, hiking, and depending on what area of state, there's a lot of other opportunities about having a strong sense of connection to nature. And so cost of living is a big driver for quality of life. Typically you think that people move up to Alaska and it's expensive. Well, it's expensive if you're kind of coming from a suburb, but a lot of where these creative folks are at, they're in around one of the major tech cities. So Anchorage is right here, that was the benchmark. Austin, when you're taking into account food, housing, clothes, transportation, personal expenses, entertainment, Austin beats out Anchorage by 10%. Although Anchorage is number 2 when you take into account those things. And then it goes Helsinki, Stockholm, Seattle, San Francisco, and New York. So San Francisco and New York being almost 30% more expensive. So it's not that it's expensive up here. It's actually, we're doing quite well. And so you can see, if you were just to look at these, so this is home prices of houses in Juneau and Anchorage and Seattle. So green is obviously Seattle, and if you were to look at these without Seattle, they look like they're skyrocketing. But when we actually put it into perspective of what's happening in a lot of the other major markets in the nation, it looks like this, and that creates problems with quality of life because cost is going up. In addition to that, there's some changes in the tax law that actually make it much better for people to move up here. We should be taking advantage and talking about why they should be moving up here. And so I'm actually a millennial. I'm at the very tail end of being a millennial. You're 22 to 37 years old if you're a millennial. And the thing about millennials is that we're going to be the future workforce. We're going to be, so just as communities grow and develop, we're going to start growing and taking into account more important jobs as we actually all age and other people retire. So there's all these major cities are actually completely unaffordable for millennials. And so again, this presents an opportunity for Alaskan communities to understand this and use it to their advantage. We'll just skip ahead for a second. So there's this idea of, so obviously we can get talent. We're building Alaska's education system is building talent for the future. We can attract some new talent to help accelerate that. But then the next one is tolerance. And my brother and I believe that the biggest part of tolerance is this idea of work-life integration. And the COO of Facebook says there's no such thing as a work-life balance. There's only work, and there's life, and there's no balance. And the reason for that is, way prior to the industrial age, the machine age, work and family were two independent domains. So you went to work, and then you did your work. After 8 hours, you came home, and there was no connection between those two, because there was not even technology to support it. In the industrial age, work started spilling into family time, and kind of started blurring those lines. And now with technology, most of the workday spend 24 hours a day, and then there's some time for non-work activities. And I'm assuming most of you in the room, since you are in the outdoors and probably involved in your own companies, you're probably in that latter group. So what is work-life integration? Well, it's about blending and bringing elements of work and life together. So it's about having a flexible workplace flexibility, so your locational work. So instead of my brother programming down in Seattle, he's up here in Valdez, scheduling of hours. Well, this goes back to being able to take into account the outdoors. If there's fresh powder up in Thompson Pass, let's go skiing. And then at the end of the day, let's work another 4 hours from 5 to 9 and get the work done that we need done. And then, of course, the amount of hours. So maybe sometimes you're just in a better flow state and can create more value in a shorter amount of time, and you don't necessarily be penalized for that. So ultimately, we believe that future great companies will embrace more flexible ways of working where employees are connected to their community and to nature. So the cool part about this is, so Brother and I came up here 2 years ago, and the last year, communities have actually started to embrace this idea of work-life integration in order to attract these creative workers. And so we heard a little bit about that with Ketchikan. But ultimately, Catherine definitely took a big step in building the first co-working space to bring together these creative folks, entrepreneurs, professionals, engineers, together to start creating this idea of a community and help diversify our economies. We then got Alaska Startups to help foster entrepreneurship. But more recently, we had 2 different communities, Ketchikan, and then in a second, Juneau, start to embrace this idea of how do we attract remote workers to diversify their economies. And I'll just read this for you, because it kind of hits home and summarizes a lot of what we
we've been thinking about. So for remote workers and other, so live, catch you can, live connected. For remote workers and other tech-based entrepreneurs, Catch You Can represents a unique opportunity to live a connected lifestyle. Living in Catch You Can means living connected to stunning natural beauty, to lightning speed internet, to low-cost renewable energy, to unique arts and cultural experiences, and to excellent medical and education facilities. And that's true for a lot of these rural communities, and specifically Valdez and Juneau and Anchorage for sure. So Juneau, shortly thereafter, launched this Choose Juneau campaign, and it says explores Juneau's boundless adventures and job opportunities. So it's, again, it goes back to that idea of work-life integration, and they're trying to attract and support this new way of working. And then there might be a new co-working space, but people are investing in thinking about how we can bring people together to change our economies. And the third one, in order to attract the creative workers to build a creative class, is technology. And so fiber optic internet will be the foundation for the next frontier up here in Alaska, which is the technology frontier. So they say that economic development and job creation can be the killer app for local networks. Brother and I from Washington, and so they say that Washington is ranked 14 as the most connected state. And there's 3 different options: 25 plus megabits, 100, and then 1 gig. And I selected 1 gig, and so you can't really see anything because there's not many places that have a lot of 1 gig. And down here, so they take this being the most connected state by taking into account 25 and 100 megabits, not 1 gig. And so Washington is basically 12% of Washingtonians have access to 1 gig internet. California, they rank 9th as the most connected, but only 1.5 of Californians actually have access to 1 gig internet. But they rank Alaska as 44th, but then they say 68% of Alaskans have access to 1 gig broadband. That's crazy, if you just think about that. Maybe the number's a little high. It's still much higher, significantly, than a lot of the communities down in the lower 48. And this goes back to, in order for Alaska to set us up to have a successful future, there's been people investing time and energy to figure that out, including laying the foundation of fiber optic internet. So fiber is rarely the sole reason for relocating, but it can be a deciding factor. Let's see if we can get this video.
So Leland, what have you built as a network monitor?
So the hue lights, when the network goes down, the hue lights will blink red several times once the network issues start. Then, as long as the network is unreachable, they will hold on the red color. And once the network recovers and becomes reachable again, the lights will flash green, and then the lighting will just return to what it was before the network became unreachable.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, hopefully it happens.
Oh, network's back.
Look at that. And there we are. Yeah.
But the idea is that it makes it challenging for people that are creative or creative workers to actually operate up here. And so, yeah, much of what we're trying to strive for in the future actually depends on being able to support this digital economy. And amazingly, yesterday, Copper Valley Telecom actually just hooked us up to fiber, so we're going to be able to continue down this path to experiment with bringing people up to for work-life integration and help us figure out how we can start attracting this creative class to be a part of the communities and shape the future up here. Yeah, it's quite nice. Quite impressed. 275 megabits down and 90 megabits up, and the latency is stellar. So what does all this mean to startups and tech, and ultimately the larger group of creatives? Well, we're able to build, learn, and iterate faster. So instead of having to wait for someone to push code to some servers, it just goes and it doesn't impact other people's work. Quickly deploy software to the cloud for testing, or in the case if you're in the medical
field. You can communicate with doctors and surgeons in Anchorage. Better collaboration with others, exchanging larger files. So of course, we do that same thing in the medical field. Better communication with others via video conferencing. Increased ability for state of flow. So usually creatives get into the state of flow and they're able to be really productive during this time. And when technology is not interfering with that, they become more efficient. More efficient to conduct research, to do self-education, and a larger capacity for multiple engineers to work together. And it's going to be, at least this is important to us, which is required for the future of software development because everything's moving to the cloud. So, the creative class is made up of knowledge workers, intellectuals, and artists. It's a strong economic force enabling the transition from agriculture and industry-based economies to knowledge-based ones. This was a podcast done by NPR and the Oil and Gas Association. And what's interesting about it is the title of the last episode is The Future of an Oil State, What's Next for Alaska? So what we believe in is Alaska diversifies its economy beyond oil and natural resources. There'll be less of a demand for these natural resources to be exploited and exported. And so tech in Alaska will actually help protect and preserve these natural resources so we can ultimately have the most epic outdoor recreation in the world. Thank you.